The truth doesn't always knock on your door. Sometimes it waits in a dusty box beneath your bed for 20 years. The old wooden box smelled like cedar, dust, and forgotten promises. I sat cross-legged on the worn carpet of my tiny apartment in Brooklyn, staring at it while rain tapped softly against the window beside me. Outside, the city hummed with its usual Saturday night energy. Car horns echoed in the distance. Neon lights painted faint colors across the wet pavement below. But inside my apartment, everything felt strangely still, almost like the room itself was holding its breath. The box had belonged to my mother. At least, that's what I had always been told. She died when I was 12, leaving behind little more than faded photographs, a few handwritten recipes, and this box. For years, I had kept it tucked away beneath my bed without ever opening it. Some part of me had been afraid of what I might find inside. Another part was afraid I would find nothing at all. Tomorrow, I was supposed to start a new job. Blackwood Manor. The largest private estate I had ever seen. The kind of place people only glimpse through iron gates while driving past expensive neighborhoods. I had been hired as a live-in maid after months of struggling to keep up with rent, bills, and everything else life seemed determined to throw my way. It was a fresh start. Or at least that was what I kept telling myself. Maybe that was why I finally reached for the box. Maybe before stepping into a new chapter, I needed to understand the one I had left behind. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted the brass latch. The metal gave a soft click. A strange chill ran through me. Inside were only a few items. A folded baby blanket, several photographs with worn edges, a silver necklace, and an envelope. I picked up the necklace first. The chain felt cool against my skin. Hanging from it was a small silver key. Not decorative, not flashy, just simple, practical, oddly familiar. I couldn't explain why, but the moment I touched it, a faint image flashed through my mind. A large staircase, bright sunlight pouring through enormous windows. A man laughing somewhere nearby. Then the memory vanished as quickly as it came. I blinked and stared down at the necklace. My heart had begun beating faster. "What are you?" I whispered. The rain outside seemed louder now. I set the necklace aside and reached for the photographs. Most showed my mother when she was younger, smiling, standing beside places I didn't recognize. But one photograph immediately caught my attention. It showed a man standing beside a black luxury car. Tall, well-dressed. His arm rested protectively around someone whose face had been torn from the picture. I frowned. The tear looked deliberate, careful, almost surgical. Why would someone remove a person from a photograph? I turned the picture over. Nothing. No date. No note. No explanation. Just silence. The envelope was the last item remaining, yellowed with age. My name written across the front in handwriting I instantly recognized. Grace. My throat tightened. It was my mother's handwriting. I carefully opened the seal. A single folded letter waited inside. The paper crackled softly as I unfolded it. My eyes moved to the first line, and the moment I read it, every sound in the room seemed to disappear. If anything ever happens to me, you must find Ethan Blackwood. My mother had been gone for 13 years, yet seeing those words felt like hearing her voice again for the first time. I read the sentence 3 times, hoping more meaning would magically appear between the letters. It did not. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. Outside, the rain continued to fall against the glass, but now it sounded distant, as if the entire world had moved a few steps farther away. I lowered myself onto the edge of my bed and kept reading. The letter was short, far shorter than I expected. Grace, if you are reading this, then I am no longer here to answer the questions you deserve to ask. I wish I could explain everything. I wish I could tell you why we had to leave. I wish I could tell you why some truths are safer hidden. But there is one thing you must know. If the day ever comes when you feel ready, find Ethan Blackwood. He knows who you are. The letter ended there. No explanation. No address. No signature beyond a simple mom written at the bottom. My chest tightened. Ethan Blackwood. The name meant nothing to me. Yet somehow, reading it filled me with a strange sense of familiarity. Like hearing a song I had forgotten years ago. I turned the page over. Nothing. No additional notes. No clues. Just empty paper. I glanced back toward the photograph lying beside me. The man standing next to the luxury car. The face I had barely studied before suddenly seemed more important than anything else in the room. Could that be Ethan Blackwood? The thought settled heavily into my mind. I picked up my phone and typed the name into a search engine. The results appeared instantly. Ethan Blackwood, founder and chief executive officer of Blackwood Technologies. Estimated net worth, $8.7 billion. Owner of Blackwood Manor. My stomach dropped. Blackwood Manor. I stared at the screen. Then I looked around my apartment, as if the walls themselves might explain what was happening. Tomorrow morning I was supposed to begin working there. Out of all the estates in New York, out of all the employers in the city, somehow I had been hired to work for the very man named in my mother's letter. A nervous laugh escaped my lips. The coincidence felt impossible. The more I thought about it, the less I believed it was a coincidence at all. Sleep did not come easily that night. Every time I closed my eyes, questions crowded into the darkness. Who was Ethan Blackwood? How did my mother know him? Why had she hidden this letter for so many years? And most importantly, what did she mean when she wrote that he knows who you are? By 6 o'clock the next morning, I had given up on sleeping altogether. Gray morning lights spilled through the window as I loaded my suitcase into the back of a rideshare vehicle. The silver necklace rested beneath my sweater, cool against my skin. The photograph and letter remained safely tucked inside my bag. The driver headed north through winding roads lined with towering trees. 40 minutes later, the gates appeared. Massive black iron gates standing nearly 12 feet tall. Beyond them stretched acres of perfectly maintained grounds disappearing into the morning mist. The gates slowly opened. As the car rolled forward, my pulse quickened. Then I saw the manor itself. And for a brief second, a memory I could not explain flashed through my mind. I had seen this place before. I had seen this place before. The certainty hit me so suddenly that I gripped the edge of the seat. The manor stood at the end of a long curved driveway lined with ancient oak trees. Morning fog drifted across the lawn in thin, silver ribbons. The stone walls glowed softly beneath the rising sun. Everything about it felt familiar, and I hated that I could not explain why. The driver pulled to a stop beneath a covered entrance supported by massive columns. Before I could gather my thoughts, the front doors opened. A woman in her 60s stepped outside. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and her posture was so perfect she looked like she had been standing straight her entire life. She offered a warm smile. "You must be Grace Parker." I nodded and stepped out of the car. "I am Margaret Bennett, the house manager. Welcome to Blackwood Manor." Her voice was kind, but there was something observant behind her eyes, as though she noticed details most people missed. She helped me with my suitcase and guided me inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, a strange feeling settled over me. The air smelled faintly of polished wood, fresh flowers, and old books. Sunlight streamed through towering windows, illuminating marble floors that stretched farther than any hallway I had ever seen. My footsteps echoed softly. Every sound felt amplified. Every corner seemed to whisper with memories I could not reach. "You will settle into the East Wing," Margaret explained as we walked. "Most of the staff live on the property. Mr. Blackwood prefers privacy, so the household runs on a very structured schedule." I nodded while trying not to stare. Expensive paintings lined the walls. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Yet despite all the beauty, the house felt oddly quiet. Not peaceful, lonely, like a place waiting for something. Or someone. We turned down another hallway, and suddenly I stopped walking. My eyes locked onto a staircase at the far end. My breath caught. For a split second, I saw a little girl racing down those steps. Blonde curls bouncing, laughter filling the air. Then the image vanished. Gone as quickly as it appeared. "Grace?" Margaret asked gently. I blinked. "Sorry, I just thought." My voice trailed off. What could I possibly say? That I was remembering a place I had never been? She studied me for a moment, but did not press further. "Long trip," she suggested. Something like that. We continued walking. 20 minutes later, after showing me my room and explaining my duties, Margaret handed me a detailed schedule. "You may begin tomorrow morning. Today is simply for settling in." Relief washed over me. I needed time to think. Time to understand why this place felt so familiar. After unpacking, I wandered toward a large sitting room overlooking the gardens. The room was empty except for a grand piano positioned beside the windows. Dustless, perfectly maintained, yet somehow untouched. My gaze shifted to the framed photographs displayed on a nearby table. Most showed charity events, business functions, and formal gatherings. Then one photograph caught my eye. A younger Ethan Blackwood stood smiling beside a woman with bright eyes and a little girl no older than 5. My heart stopped. The little girl was wearing a silver necklace. A necklace shaped like a key. The little silver key seemed to glow beneath the glass frame. My hand instinctively moved to my sweater, finding the necklace hidden beneath the fabric. The shape was identical. Same size, same design, same tiny engraving along the edge that I had never been able to read clearly. A cold wave traveled through my chest. I looked back at the photograph. The smiling little girl stood between Ethan Blackwood and the woman beside him. Her small hand rested against the necklace hanging around her neck. The same necklace. My necklace. The room suddenly felt smaller. The air felt heavier. I leaned closer to the photograph, studying every detail. The little girl could not have been older than 5. Blonde hair, bright eyes, a wide smile. Something about her felt familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten. Not because she looked like me, because she felt like me. That photograph is very old. The voice startled me. I turned so quickly that my shoulder brushed the table. Margaret stood in the doorway holding a tray with a cup of tea. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I did not mean to frighten you." I forced a smile. I was just looking around. Her gaze drifted toward the photograph. For the briefest moment, sadness crossed her face. The family used to spend a lot of time in this room. Used to. Not anymore. She placed the tray on a nearby table. "Mr. Blackwood rarely comes in here now." I glanced back toward the photograph. The little girl? Margaret hesitated. The silence lasted only a second, but it felt much longer. "His daughter," she finally said. "She disappeared many years ago." My pulse quickened. "Disappeared?" Margaret nodded. "A long time ago." Her voice became distant, careful. People still talk about it in town. It was one of those stories nobody ever forgot. I looked down at the photograph again. My fingers unconsciously closed around the necklace beneath my sweater. Did they ever find her? Margaret slowly shook her head. No, the answer lingered in the room. Heavy, uncomfortable, final. I swallowed. That must have been difficult. A sad smile touched her lips. Some losses change people forever. Before I could ask another question, a grandfather clock somewhere deeper inside the manor chimed the hour. Margaret straightened. "Mr. Blackwood has returned." The words seemed to alter the atmosphere immediately. Even the staff members moving through the hallway outside appeared more alert, more focused. "He is home?" I asked. "Yes." Margaret glanced toward the window. His meetings ended earlier than expected. For reasons I could not explain, my heartbeat accelerated. Ethan Blackwood, the man from my mother's letter, the man from the photograph, the man who supposedly knew who I was. Somewhere inside this enormous house, he was walking through the same hallways at that very moment. I turned toward the window, overlooking the circular driveway. A sleek black car had just stopped near the entrance. The driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out. Even from this distance, there was something unmistakable about him. Confidence, presence, the kind of quiet authority that made people instinctively notice when he entered a room. He adjusted his coat and started toward the front doors. Then, as if sensing something, he stopped. Slowly, he looked up, directly toward the window where I was standing. And for one impossible second, our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. The distance between the manor and the driveway should have made the moment insignificant. Instead, it felt strangely personal. Ethan Blackwood stood beside the car, one hand resting on the open door. The afternoon light caught the silver strands near his temples. Even from where I stood, I could see the sharp focus in his expression. He was not casually glancing at the house. He was looking directly at me. Then the front door opened behind him. A man in a dark suit approached with a tablet in hand. The interruption broke whatever invisible connection had formed. Ethan looked away. A second later, he disappeared inside. I released a breath I had not realized I was holding. "Are you all right?" Margaret asked quietly. "Yes," I lied. My voice sounded distant even to me. Margaret studied me for a second, but said nothing. After she left, I remained by the window. Questions circled endlessly through my mind. My mother's letter, the missing daughter, the necklace, the photograph. None of it made sense. Yet every answer seemed connected to the same man. By evening, the manor settled into a calm routine. Staff members moved quietly through the halls. Lamps cast warm pools of light across polished wood floors. Somewhere downstairs, dishes clinked softly as dinner preparations continued. I spent most of the evening organizing supplies in one of the guest wings, grateful for the distraction. Work gave my mind something concrete to focus on. Unfortunately, It did not stop me from touching the necklace every few minutes. Around 7 o'clock, Margaret asked me to deliver a folder to the library. Mr. Blackwood requested it earlier, she explained. Just leave it on his desk if he is occupied. My pulse immediately quickened. The library? Second floor. End of the west corridor. She offered a reassuring smile. Do not worry. He is not nearly as intimidating as people imagine. I was not convinced. The folder felt unusually heavy as I climbed the staircase. The west corridor was quieter than the rest of the house. Thick carpets softened every footstep. Family portraits watched silently from the walls. As I approached the library doors, I noticed warm light spilling through a narrow opening. The door was slightly ajar. I gently knocked. No answer. After a brief hesitation, I pushed the door open. The room was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves covered every wall. A fire crackled softly in a stone fireplace. The scent of leather-bound books filled the air. Behind a large desk, Ethan sat reviewing documents. He looked up immediately. Those gray-blue eyes settled on me with startling intensity. I am sorry, I said quickly. Margaret asked me to bring this. I stepped forward and placed the folder on the desk. Thank you. His voice was calm, deep, controlled. I turned to leave. Then something slipped from beneath my collar. The silver key necklace fell into view. The chain caught against the fabric of my sweater. I froze. Across the room, Ethan froze too. His eyes locked onto the necklace. The color drained from his face. For several long seconds, he said absolutely nothing. Then he slowly stood from behind the desk. Where did you get that necklace? The question hung between us like a suspended breath. Where did you get that necklace? I looked down instinctively. The small silver key rested against my sweater, catching the firelight from across the room. For the first time since arriving at Blackwood Manor, Ethan Blackwood no longer looked composed. Something deeper had broken through the calm mask he wore so effortlessly. Surprise, hope, fear. I could not tell which was strongest. It belonged to my mother, I answered carefully. She left it to me. His eyes never left the necklace. Your mother gave it to you? Yes. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that feels heavy with thoughts neither person knows how to say out loud. Ethan slowly stepped around the desk. How long have you had it? As long as I can remember. His jaw tightened slightly. And your mother never told you where it came from? My heart began to beat faster. Every instinct told me this conversation mattered. No, she never explained it. Ethan nodded once, though he seemed distracted. His gaze remained fixed on the silver key. There were only 2 of those ever made. The word sent a chill through me. What do you mean? For a moment, he looked as if he regretted saying anything at all. Then he glanced toward the fire. Years ago, they were commissioned as gifts. His voice sounded distant. One for my wife. One for my daughter. The room suddenly felt smaller. I could hear the soft crackle of burning logs in the fireplace. The ticking of an antique clock somewhere behind me. Every sound seemed unnaturally clear. Your daughter? I asked quietly. Ethan finally looked up. Our eyes met. The daughter who disappeared. My throat tightened. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. I wanted to tell him about the photograph. About the letter. About the strange memories that kept surfacing whenever I walked through the manor. But something held me back. Maybe uncertainty. Maybe fear of sounding completely unreasonable. Ethan seemed to be fighting a battle of his own. Questions moved behind his eyes. Calculations. Possibilities. Then the library door opened. Margaret stepped inside carrying a stack of documents. The interruption shattered the moment immediately. Ethan straightened. The emotion vanished from his expression so quickly I wondered if I had imagined it. I apologize, Margaret said. I did not realize you were occupied. It is fine, Ethan replied. His voice had returned to its usual calm control. Margaret placed the documents on the desk and offered me a small smile. Grace, the staff meeting begins in 10 minutes. Of course. I nodded. As I turned toward the door, Ethan spoke again. Grace. I paused. Yes. His eyes settled on me once more. If you remember anything about that necklace, anything at all, I would like to know. The request sounded simple. Yet something in his tone made it feel far more important than he intended to reveal. I will, I promised. I left the library and stepped into the quiet corridor. My pulse was still racing. The necklace felt heavier than it ever had before. As I walked toward the staircase, my hand slipped into my pocket. My fingers touched the folded letter from my mother. And for the first time, I began to wonder if she had sent me here on purpose. That night, sleep refused to come. The manor was quiet, but my mind was not. Every question seemed to circle the same mystery. My mother, the letter, the necklace, Ethan Blackwood. I lay awake staring at the ceiling while moonlight spilled across the room in pale silver bands. Around midnight, I finally gave up trying to sleep. I slipped out of bed and walked to the window. The ground stretched into darkness beyond the glass. A few lights still glowed in distant parts of the estate. One of them came from the west wing, the library. Somehow, I was not surprised. Ethan did not seem like a man who slept easily. The next morning arrived wrapped in gray clouds. A light drizzle coated the gardens outside. My first official day began before sunrise. Margaret assigned me to help organize several unused rooms on the second floor. Most had not been touched in years. Dust sheets covered furniture. Old clocks stood frozen in time. Family photographs filled shelves and cabinets. Around 10 o'clock, I entered a small sitting room at the end of a rarely used corridor. Unlike the others, this room felt personal. A faded rocking chair sat beside the window. Children's books filled one shelf. A collection of stuffed animals rested neatly on another. I stopped moving. Something about the room made my chest tighten. The air felt different here. Familiar. Without thinking, I crossed to the bookshelf. My fingers brushed the spine of a worn storybook. The moment I touched it, a strange sensation rushed through me. I could almost hear laughter. A child's laughter. Soft. Happy. Close. I quickly pulled my hand away. The feeling disappeared. My heart raced. Grace. Margaret's voice startled me. I turned. She stood in the doorway holding a clipboard. Her expression immediately softened when she noticed where I was standing. I did not realize this room was unlocked. I glanced around. Whose room was this? For a second, she seemed unsure whether to answer. Then she sighed quietly. It belonged to Ethan's daughter. My eyes moved slowly across the room. Suddenly everything made sense. The books, the toys, the untouched feeling hanging in the air. Time had stopped here. Nothing has changed, I whispered. Margaret nodded. Not much. Her voice carried a sadness that felt very old. Mr. Blackwood never allowed anyone to remove anything. I looked toward the rocking chair. A small white blanket still rested across one arm. After all these years? Some people keep hoping. The words lingered long after she left. Later that afternoon, while dusting a cabinet near the window, I noticed something hidden behind a stack of books. A small wooden box. My pulse quickened as I carefully lifted it free. The box was locked. Not unusual. Except for one detail. The lock was shaped like a tiny keyhole. Exactly the same shape as the silver key hanging around my neck. My hands suddenly felt cold. Slowly, I reached beneath my collar and held the necklace in my palm. The silver key gleamed softly in the afternoon light. And for the first time, I realized it might not be a necklace at all. My hands trembled as I stared at the tiny silver key resting against my palm. The room felt unnaturally quiet. Even the distant sounds of the manor seemed to fade away. Slowly, I lowered myself into the rocking chair beside the window and examined the wooden box more closely. The craftsmanship was beautiful. Delicate carvings decorated the edges. Tiny flowers intertwined with vines. Along the bottom corner, almost hidden beneath years of wear, were two engraved initials. E.B. Ethan Blackwood. A chill ran through me. This box belonged to his family, maybe even to his daughter. I glanced toward the doorway to make sure nobody was watching. Then I carefully inserted the silver key into the lock. For a second, nothing happened. My breath caught. I gently turned it clockwise. A soft click echoed through the room. The lock released. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it. Slowly, I lifted the lid. Inside rested a collection of small treasures. A faded friendship bracelet. Several crayon drawings folded neatly together. A tiny ballet slipper no larger than my hand. And beneath everything else sat a leather-bound journal. I reached for it carefully. The cover was worn from years of use. Across the front, written in uneven childish handwriting, were 3 words. My secret book. A strange sensation swept through me. Familiar. Almost comforting. As if I had held this journal before. I opened to the first page. Most entries consisted of simple childhood thoughts. Favorite colors. Favorite animals. Small observations about the world. The handwriting belonged to a young child. As I turned each page, an odd ache grew inside my chest. Then I reached a page that made me stop breathing. A crayon drawing filled the center. A man with dark hair stood holding hands with a little girl wearing a necklace shaped like a key. Above them, written in large, uneven letters, was a sentence. Me and Daddy. My eyes blurred. I quickly blinked away tears I could not explain. Why was this affecting me so deeply? Why did every object in this room feel connected to something buried deep inside me? I turned another page. Then another. Suddenly, a folded piece of paper slipped from between the pages and landed on the floor. I bent down and picked it up. It was a photograph, much older than the others. The edges had yellowed with age. The image showed the same little girl standing beside a large fountain outside the manor. She could not have been older than 5. She was smiling directly at the camera. My pulse accelerated. The little girl was wearing the silver key necklace. But that was not what made my hands begin to shake. It was her face. I stared at the photograph. Then I moved toward the window where the light was stronger. My reflection appeared faintly against the glass. I looked from the reflection to the photograph. Back and forth. Again and again. The same eyes. The same smile. The same shape of the face. My knees nearly gave out beneath me. Then a floorboard creaked somewhere behind me. I spun around. Someone was standing in the doorway. Ethan Blackwood was staring directly at the photograph in my hands. Neither of us spoke. The room seemed frozen in place. Dust floated through narrow beams of afternoon sunlight. The journal rested open beside me. The photograph trembled slightly in my hand. Ethan remained motionless in the doorway, staring at the image as if the rest of the world had disappeared. I had never seen anyone look at a photograph that way before. Not with surprise. Not with hope. Not with heartbreak. All at once. Slowly, he stepped into the room. His eyes never left the picture. Where did you find that? His voice was barely above a whisper. I glanced toward the open wooden box on the floor. Inside this, Ethan followed my gaze. The moment he saw the box, something changed in his expression. Recognition. He crossed the room and knelt beside it. His hand moved across the carved surface almost reverently. I remember this. The words sounded distant, like he was speaking to himself. She carried it everywhere. My pulse quickened. She. Not my daughter. Not the little girl. She. As though the child in the photograph still existed somewhere. Ethan carefully lifted the journal from the floor. For several seconds, he stared at the childish handwriting on the cover. Then he opened it. A faint smile touched his face. The first genuine smile I had seen from him. It lasted only a second before fading again. She loved drawing. His eyes moved across the pages. Every wall in this house used to end up covered in crayon marks. I found myself smiling despite everything. Sounds familiar. Ethan looked up. What do you mean? The answer came before I could stop it. My mother used to complain about that. Silence. The smile vanished from his face. Your mother? I nodded. She said I drew on everything when I was little. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. Not suspicious. Focused. Connecting pieces. Searching for something. Do you remember much about your childhood? The question caught me off guard. Not really. I shrugged. Only fragments. He stood slowly. Fragments. I looked toward the window. Small things. Places. Sounds. Nothing clear. My fingers tightened around the photograph. Since arriving here, it has been happening more often. Ethan said nothing. I continued anyway. The staircase felt familiar. So did this room. Sometimes I think I remember something, and then it disappears before I can hold on to it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan took a slow breath. Grace. The seriousness in his voice immediately captured my attention. There is something I need to show you. My heart skipped. What is it? He hesitated. Whatever he was about to say seemed difficult. Finally, he gestured toward the hallway. Come with me. We left the room together. The manor felt different now. Every corridor seemed filled with questions. Ethan led me through a section of the house I had never seen before. Eventually, we stopped outside a set of double doors. His hand rested on the handle. Nobody comes in here, he said quietly. Then he opened the doors. The room beyond looked untouched by time. And hanging on the far wall was a massive family portrait. The little girl in the painting was looking directly at me. The portrait towered above us. Rich colors glowed beneath soft lighting that had probably illuminated the painting for decades. Ethan stood beside a woman with warm eyes and a gentle smile. Between them stood the little girl. Her blonde hair rested neatly on her shoulders. The silver key necklace hung around her neck. My knees felt weak. I stared at her face. Then I stared at my reflection in the glass covering the portrait. The similarities were impossible to ignore now. Not identical. Time changed people. Years changed people. But the eyes, the shape of the smile, the slight curve of the chin, they were all there. Her name was Lily, Ethan said quietly. The room felt frozen around his words. She was 5 years old when she disappeared. I could not look away from the portrait. She looks like me. My voice barely sounded like my own. Ethan remained silent for several seconds. Yes. The honesty in that single word hit harder than anything else. I swallowed. You think I am her? Ethan looked at the painting before answering. I do not know what to think anymore. He walked slowly toward a nearby cabinet. From inside, he removed a thick photo album and carried it to a table near the window. Sit. I obeyed without arguing. Together we opened the album. Page after page revealed the life of a happy family. Birthday parties, school events, vacations, holidays. In every photograph, Lily wore the silver key necklace. In every photograph, I felt a strange pull inside my chest. Then I reached a picture taken beside the fountain outside the manor. The same fountain from the photograph I had found in the journal. A sudden flash exploded through my mind. Bright sunlight, water sparkling, a woman's voice calling my name, a little hand holding mine. I gasped. The image vanished instantly. Ethan leaned forward. What happened? I pressed a hand against my forehead. I saw something. His expression sharpened immediately. What did you see? I do not know. My heart raced. Just a memory. Or part of one. The room grew very still. Ethan carefully closed the album. Grace, there is something else you should know. His tone made my stomach tighten. He crossed to a desk in the corner and opened a drawer. After a moment, he returned carrying a folder. The paper inside looked old, worn, frequently handled. He placed it gently on the table. For years, private investigators searched for Lily. He opened the folder. Reports, notes, photographs, newspaper clippings, decades of unanswered questions. Nothing ever led anywhere. I stared at the documents. Entire lives had been spent searching. Entire years consumed by hope. Ethan's gaze shifted toward me. Until now. My pulse quickened. What are you saying? He hesitated. For the first time since I met him, he looked uncertain. Not like a billionaire. Not like a man accustomed to control. Just a father afraid of being wrong. Finally, he took a slow breath. I think we need answers that neither memory nor photographs can provide. I already knew what he meant before he said it. A DNA test. Ethan nodded. Neither of us spoke. Outside the window, rain began tapping softly against the glass. Somewhere deep inside the manor, a clock chimed the hour. And for the first time, the possibility stopped feeling impossible. The next 3 days felt longer than the previous 3 weeks. Once the decision had been made, everything moved forward with surprising speed. The DNA samples were collected quietly through a private medical service. No lawyers, no media, no announcements. Ethan insisted on complete privacy. I was grateful for that. The possibility itself already felt overwhelming enough. I did not need the rest of the world watching. Yet waiting proved harder than I expected. Every hallway inside the manor seemed filled with questions. Every familiar corner triggered another fragment of memory. Some arrived without warning. The scent of cinnamon from the kitchen. The sound of rain against the conservatory windows. The distant melody of a piano being played somewhere in the house. Each sensation stirred something deep inside me. Pieces of a puzzle I could almost see but could never fully grasp. Ethan changed too. Not dramatically. Not in ways most people would notice. But I noticed. He asked how my day had gone. He remembered which tea I preferred. He began joining me for breakfast when his schedule allowed. Sometimes we sat in silence. Sometimes we talked for an hour. Neither of us mentioned the test. Yet it remained present in every conversation, waiting beside us like an invisible guest. On the 4th afternoon, I found Margaret arranging flowers in the main foyer. She glanced toward me and smiled. You seem happier. I laughed softly. Do I? Yes. She adjusted a white rose in the arrangement. This house has felt different since you arrived. Her words lingered with me long after she returned to work. Different. I had felt it too. The manor no longer seemed frozen in grief. The silence felt lighter somehow. Less lonely. That evening, Ethan invited me to join him in the library. A fire burned gently in the hearth while rain tapped against the tall windows. We sat across from one another, pretending to read. Neither of us turned many pages. Around 8 o'clock, A knock interrupted the quiet. Ethan immediately looked up. Something in the sound seemed to alert him. The door opened. A man in a gray suit entered carrying a sealed envelope. The room became completely still. My pulse accelerated. The envelope was not large, yet it seemed to contain the weight of an entire lifetime. The man crossed the room and handed it directly to Ethan. The results arrived sooner than expected. Ethan thanked him quietly. The door closed. Silence returned. Neither of us moved. The envelope rested on the desk between us. My mouth felt dry. Ethan stared at it for several seconds. Then he slowly picked it up. His hands appeared perfectly steady. Only his eyes betrayed the emotion underneath. He opened the seal. The paper inside rustled softly. I watched him read the first line. Then the second. The color drained from his face. The document slipped slightly in his hand. For a moment, he simply stared at the page as if unable to process what he was seeing. My heart pounded against my ribs. "Ethan," I whispered. He looked up. His eyes were filled with tears. And then he spoke 4 words that changed everything. "Grace, you are Lily." The words echoed through the library long after Ethan stopped speaking. "Grace, you are Lily." I stared at him, unable to breathe, unable to think. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. Rain tapped against the windows. Somewhere beyond the walls of the manor, the world continued exactly as it always had. But inside that room, everything had changed. Ethan remained standing beside the desk, the report still in his hand. Tears glistened in his eyes. Not dramatic tears. Not the kind people cried in movies. These were the quiet tears of someone who had carried the same heartbreak for 20 years and suddenly found himself standing on the other side of it. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. "I do not understand," I whispered. My voice sounded distant. "Small. How is this possible?" Ethan slowly sat down across from me. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then he reached into the drawer beside the desk and removed a photograph. It was older than the others, worn from being handled countless times. He slid it toward me. This was taken 2 weeks before Lily disappeared. I looked down. The little girl smiled up at me from the picture. For the first time, I was not looking at a stranger. I was looking at myself. A strange pressure built behind my eyes. Memories flickered at the edges of my mind. The fountain, the staircase, the rocking chair, the smell of cinnamon drifting through the kitchen. Fragments that had seemed random before suddenly felt connected. Real. "My mother," I began. Ethan nodded slowly. "We need to talk about her." There was no anger in his voice. Only sadness. "The woman who raised you was named Sarah Parker." I looked up sharply. "You knew her?" "Not personally." Ethan folded his hands together. "But after the investigation ended, her name appeared once in an old report. It was dismissed at the time because there was no evidence linking her to anything." My heart tightened. "She loved me." "I believe she did." Ethan's answer came without hesitation. "Nothing about this changes that." The room grew quiet again. That simple truth hurt more than I expected. Sarah Parker had been my mother. Maybe not by blood, but by every other measure that mattered. She had comforted me when I was sick, encouraged me when I was afraid, loved me when she did not have to. Tears slipped down my cheeks. Ethan did not try to stop them. He simply waited. Eventually, I looked up. Why would she never tell me? He glanced toward the rain-covered windows. "Perhaps she thought she was protecting you." The answer felt incomplete, yet somehow it also felt right. For a long time, we sat there in silence. 2 strangers connected by a lifetime of missing pieces. Then Ethan reached across the desk and placed the photograph between us. His voice was barely above a whisper. I missed every birthday. More tears filled his eyes. Every Christmas. Every school play. Every moment. My chest ached. Ethan lowered his head briefly before looking back at me. "If you need time, I understand." He took a slow breath. "But there is something I have wanted to say for 20 years. The room became perfectly still. "Welcome home, Lily." The first morning I woke up as Lily Blackwood, I still felt like Grace Parker. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, painting soft golden patterns across the floor. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. Then the memories of the previous night returned. The DNA test, Ethan's voice, the photograph, 20 years of missing answers finally finding their place. I sat quietly on the edge of the bed and listened to the manor waking up around me. Distant footsteps, doors opening and closing, the faint sound of dishes being prepared downstairs. Life moving forward. For the first time since arriving here, I did not feel like a visitor. I felt connected to the house in a way I could never fully explain. Later that morning, Ethan asked if I would walk with him through the gardens. The rain had finally passed. Fresh drops still clung to the roses lining the stone pathways. The air smelled clean and new. We walked slowly beneath towering trees that had stood on the estate longer than either of us had been alive. Neither of us spoke much at first. Words seemed unnecessary. Some moments were too important for conversation. Eventually, we reached the fountain. The same fountain from the photograph. The same fountain that had appeared in fragments of memory for days. I stopped beside it. Sunlight danced across the water. Suddenly, another memory surfaced, clearer than any before. A woman laughing. Ethan lifting me onto the edge of the fountain. A small silver key necklace resting against my sweater. I closed my eyes. This time the memory stayed. When I opened them again, tears blurred my vision. Ethan stood beside me. His own eyes glistened. Neither of us needed to explain what had happened. We both knew. The memories were returning. Not all at once. Not perfectly, but enough. By afternoon, the entire staff seemed to know something had changed. Margaret hugged me longer than usual. Several employees smiled whenever they passed me in the hall. Nobody asked questions. Nobody demanded explanations. Somehow they understood that some stories deserve patience. That evening, Ethan led me to a room at the end of the East Wing. The same room that had remained untouched for 20 years. Lily's room. My room. The rocking chair still sat beside the window. The books remained on the shelves. The small wooden box rested on the desk. Time had preserved everything. I walked slowly through the room, touching familiar objects that had once belonged to a child I was only beginning to remember. On the wall hung a framed drawing. Crayon lines. Bright colors. A family standing together beneath a large yellow sun. I smiled through tears. I really did draw on everything. Ethan laughed softly. The sound surprised both of us. It had probably been years since laughter had come so easily. We stood there for a long moment looking around the room. Not at the past, not at the years that had been lost, but at the future that still remained. As the sun began to set beyond the windows, warm light filled the room. The loneliness that had haunted the manor for 2 decades seemed to fade with the shadows. Families are not always broken by the secrets that separate them. Sometimes they are rebuilt by the truth that finally brings them home. And after 20 years, I had finally found mine.